Before we get into this episode, I would like to pre-warn you that the following story contains subject matter that some people may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. All three of them use exactly the same terms for those items, but they were supposedly living separately.
Right, which means to me that someone told them what to call them that.
Hello, and welcome back to 1 Minute Remaining. My name is Jack Lawrence, the host and creator of this show. Today is part 5 of the story of Dwight Bergeron, a man who has spent over 3 decades of his life incarcerated in one of the country's worst prisons for a crime not only he says he didn't commit, but his 3 so-called victims, his own children, now adults, say he didn't do.
You may start the conversation now.
Hello, Jack.
Here he is, Mr. Bergeron. How are you, sir?
I'm busy.
Keeping busy?
Oh, yeah. The rodeo's been selling out every Sunday. And it just is, oh, Lord. Whew. God, they are selling some autograph. I got to say that.
Making some money.
Yeah. I did, let's see, little 400 something on the first Sunday, 900 something like that on the second Sunday.
Wow.
This last Sunday, I just did 620.
You're making more money than me.
Yeah, but once a year I get this privilege.
Yes.
I told Janet, she said, "Food, baby." I said, "I've been buying me some food.
Yeah, I
don't
bet.
get this opportunity." And she's like, "You better not get fat." I said, "I'm working off. You know me. I don't get this opportunity but once a year." And I said, "Baby, I'm eating. God dog it, I'll eat."
You're like a bear who goes into hibernation. You're just eating while the food's there and getting ready for the leaner times.
You got clubs around here, these clubs.
Now, recently in the Facebook group, some people have made mention of the fact that they have been struggling in parts to understand Dwight. He does have a very strong accent. And of course, the prison phone line on top of that doesn't help. But I did get a bit of a chuckle when I was talking to Dwight the other day, and he made mention of some people within the facility that he struggles to understand. Is the whole situation within the prison still very much race-based? Like, does everyone keep to their own sort of race still these days?
They kind of... The only problem we got with a lot of the Hispanics, a lot of them, you can't always understand them, and they have a lot of, basic, some of them they have a broken English, they can talk some English, but a lot of them you can't understand what the hell they say.
It did make me smile when you said, the problem with the Mexicans and that is you can't understand them, because I certainly struggle sometimes understanding you, my friend.
Oh man, that's right.
It's just I find it quite amazing how we all speak the same language. We all speak the same language, but we all speak it so differently. It's incredible.
Different
accents and cultures, and it's incredible that
we had a lady that was in our church from Australia, but she was and I'd be like, what you saying? And she was bad. I was like, and I'm like, okay.
Now, I know I've already given a warning in regards to this episode, and in fact, this entire story, but I would like to just give an extra warning for this particular episode, because we will be looking at medical reports, which of course go into a bit more detail as to the alleged assaults on these children. I will not go into too much graphic detail, but of course there are aspects of this that we do need to look at, because this is the case that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to give you that extra warning. And of course, that being said as well, it does mean that unfortunately you're going to be hearing a fair bit of my voice this episode. So on both counts, I apologize. In our previous episode, Dwight talked us through his lawyer's defense strategy, which he says was rather lackluster, mainly due to the fact that he had never defended a case like this. When he asked the judge for money to be able to bring an expert witness, he was essentially told no.
I remember when he asked for the money for an expert, and the judge says, "Well, give me a reason why." He just puts his hands up in the air and he says, "Your Honor, I've never done a case like this. I don't even know what I'm doing." This is exactly what he told the judge. So,
what was the expert in relation to?
Dealing with the medical reports.
Okay, so an expert medical person. And then the judge went, "Why do you want one?" And he said, I don't know.
Exactly.
So let's take a look at the so-called medical reports that were initially done by a Dr. L.J. Mayu. Now, for those with a keen ear, that last name might sound familiar because, of course, two of the adoptive parents in this case were Johnny and Renee Mayu. However, I'm told that they weren't related to the doctor, the last name being the same is merely a coincidence. However, they may not have been connected by blood, but it seems there was a connection. So this Dr. Mayu, is it just a coincidence that that doctor's got the same last name as the adoptive parents?
It is a coincidence, yes.
Okay, fair enough.
They were very close friends, so much so that Dr. Mayu is the one that would take the boys hunting, and he taught them how to shoot guns. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't just trust anybody with my kids to do that. The boys called him Uncle LJ.
So Dr. Mayu, or Uncle LJ as he was known to the children, was said to have examined all three of them. He had been asked to look at the children by Mr. Normans. That's Ron Norman, who we met in the previous episode, who was the child protection investigator. Mr. Ron Norman sent Uncle LJ a full rundown of the supposed allegations made by the children about their sexual abuse. This is, in part, what his findings were in relation to Rebecca. Physical findings of Rebecca were all normal. She's an intelligent 6-year-old who relates her history without any prompting and gives vivid details. On physical findings of the vaginal area, the hymenal ring was stretched. Of great interest is that there are 2 splits where the hymen ring meets the vaginal walls laterally. At 11 and 1, there are 2 slits that are noted to be in a tearing configuration, which goes along with abnormal stretching of the vagina. The rectal sphincter was also quite loose for her age. Impression: history of sexual abuse, anal and vaginal multiple times. This child was subjected to unbelievable sexual atrocities when she was living with her parents. Recommendation is total adoption process as done and prosecution of parents and any people involved in this case. Obviously, some pretty serious words coming from Dr. Mayu and some awful findings. Now, when it comes to the boys, his report in part reads the following. Mother states that there has been abnormal behavior for the last several nights. Shane has been very aggressive sexually towards Christopher. He has been rubbing his buttocks on Christopher's leg. They both admit to it. I'm like, how's that sexually aggressive? I mean, my kids muck around and sit on each other. And it's just like, but there's kids just messing about. So how is rubbing a buttock on your brother sexually aggressive?
No, it's ridiculous. And, and we don't have any context. Did these children go to a pediatrician? Did somebody get their pediatric records? Was there ever any indication that any of the children were abused? I mean, there is an indication that one of the neighbors said that the children were neglected, and it was unfounded.
There are no changes in physical findings from the last exam. It is my feeling that the behavior is a carryover from their early conditioning. Renee and Johnny Mayu are still seeking counseling on a regular basis. And that's essentially the entirety of his findings. So, of course, he does state there that there are no changes in physical findings from the last exam. Here's Jeanette, Dwight's partner again.
Yeah.
Where's that exam?
We have no record of that.
So the extent of his report on the boys that he handed to the authorities for them to be able to charge Dwight and Angela with this crime was him literally saying there are no changes in physical findings from the last exam, but we don't have the last exam anywhere.
Right. There is no record of any other exam.
However, come time for trial, in a pre-trial hearing, the prosecution would announce to the judge that, in fact, Uncle LJ was wrong in his findings. This is an excerpt from the trial transcripts of that pre-trial hearing. This is the prosecutor from the case speaking. I just want to point out one other thing to you, Judge. just to let the court know and be aware of the extra step that I feel like the state's going to in this case. These children, more particularly the female child, was examined by the coroner in Avaloy's parish when information as to what had occurred first came out, and the coroner issued a report, which I've given to defence counsel. Now, when he's talking about the coroner here, he's talking about L.J. Bayou. He continues. He found severe evidence of sexual abuse when he did a vaginal exam on this child. Rather than using, and as we all know, most coroners are either family practitioners or just regular GPs. So really, what we did was send her, the children, to the children's clinic for Dr. Kaufman to look at. And Dr. Kaufman's testimony is going to be that really this particular physician, not being well-versed and not being trained and not having the latest technology in examining children, was mistaken. That the abnormality that he found in the child's vagina is a congenital thing and was not caused by abuse. So prior to trial, the prosecution have got up and stated in court that they have sent the children to what they say is an expert because Uncle LJ wasn't qualified to be giving an opinion. Now, let's not forget that his opinion was, extremely scathing. In fact, he states unequivocally that this child was subjected to unbelievable sexual atrocities when she was living with her parents.
You talk about sexual atrocities. Atrocity is words. That's a word used in to describe the Vietnam War.
Now even the prosecution are saying that, he's wrong. And in fact, our expert can't find any physical signs of this sexual abuse. So Uncle LJ wasn't qualified to be giving an opinion. However, he was qualified enough for them to initially be able to issue arrest warrants for Dwight and his wife. And what's even more concerning is that there's also claims that Uncle LJ never even conducted one of these exams at all.
Chris told me the other day, he said, Uncle LJ said that he examined me and Shane. He said, no, they didn't. He didn't. He said that was Renee and LJ's wife, who was his secretary at the doctor's office. They went in a room and Renee and her were talking, and that was the extent of that.
Because it's saying here that he examined all three kids for 15 minutes.
No, not according to the kids. He did not. Becky says that he never examined her like that.
A lot of people would say, though, how would she remember because she was very young at the time, how would she remember if he'd examined her or not?
Becky was 6 years old, and she had to go for an examination with the other doctor that the DA chose. And because, you see, they got the indictment with Dr. Mayu's report, but then they would not let him stand. They would not let it stand. So the district attorney brought in another doctor that he had worked with several times. Well, she did an extensive examination of them. And that was Dr. Kaufman.
Right.
And all the kids remember that, and they will tell you everything that happened with that examination. But they will also all tell you that Dr. Mayu never examined them like that. The only time they saw him was for school physicals and stuff. There was never any kind of sexual exam done by LJ Mayu, not according to the kids.
So the children are sent along to see another physician by the name of Catherine Kaufman. She would speak with and examine all three children who were taken to the office by their adoptive parents. In her report on Becky, she first speaks with Becky's new adoptive parents, who say that they were unaware of any allegations of sexual abuse prior to Becky coming to live with them. They state that she was very anxious and had difficulty sleeping when she arrived, and that she had told them that several times at her biological parents' home, she would be woken up in the middle of the night by several people, including her parents, who all sexually molested her. Now, she was of course 6 at the time of this discussion with Dr. Kaufman, but according to her adoptive parents, before she came to live with them, she hadn't lived with Dwight and Angela for around a year. So she would have been about 4 or 5 when this allegedly happened. And from early accounts, when she was speaking to Uncle LJ, the other doctor, she has stated that the abuse started at the age of 2 or 3. Now, the reason I'm focusing in on this part in particular is because what our expert, Laurie Shanks, told us about young children and their perception of time.
But for someone to get up on the stand, and I've seen this all the time, did this happen in the summer? Did it happen, when you were 7? They have no clue.
Dr. Kaufman then has an interview with Becky, which reads in part. I did an interview with Rebecca privately. She talked quite easily with me. I asked her what used to happen at Dwight and Angela's home. Dwight and Angela are the names she uses for her biological mother and father. She stated that Dwight used to make booty. I asked her what that meant. She said, whenever they take all your clothes off and rub on you. I asked her what Dwight would rub on her. And she said, his bird. He put it in my tushy. Tushy is the word she uses to refer to her genital area. I asked her if he put it anywhere else, and she said, in my behind. I asked her if he put it anywhere else, and she said no. I asked her if he ever put his bird in her mouth, and she said no. I asked her if he ever put his mouth anywhere on her, and she nodded yes. I asked her where, and she said, on my tushy. I asked her who else did things like this to her, and she said, N-word, Roy. I asked her what he would do, and she said he would rub his bird in my private part and in my hiney. I asked her if anyone else had done anything, and she said, Angela, not this Angela, but the other Angela. I asked her what Angela would do, and she said, very, very, very bad things. I asked her what she meant by that, and she said she would rub her tushy on my tushy. I asked her who else had done anything to her, and she said, Dwayne. I asked her who Dwayne was, and she said, my daddy's brother. I asked her what he did, and she said, the same. He rubs his bird on my tushy. I asked her if she ever saw anything happening to her little brothers, and she stated that she had seen Angela with Jacob, and Angela was rubbing her tushy on his bird and on his hiney. She states that Angela did the same thing to her other brothers. And all the children, strangely, use the same terms for everything. So they all call a penis a birdie, they all call a vagina a tushy, and they all call their backside a hiney. All three of them. All three of them use exactly the same terms for those items, but they were supposedly living separately.
Right, which means to me that someone told them what to call them that.
When I went to trial, that's what I told the jury. I told the DA, I told the judge. I said, I know my kids. I told the jury that. I said, I know my kids. I said, my trial transcript, I said, they don't know these words. I said, somebody's telling them what to say. So the DA came back. He said, well, who's telling them what to say? I said, you and the people that work for you. He said, wait a minute, you saying I had something to do with this? I said, it's you and them agencies. I said, man. I said, the people that work for you. I said, whatever these agencies are behind the scenes, I don't know what they call it. I said, but y'all telling them what to say. I said, man, I know my babies. I said, these kids don't know these words. I look at the jury. I said, I'm telling y'all, they don't know these words, man.
I used to tell these lawyers that I trained that with a bag of Skittles, I could convict anybody in the room. Because here's what happens. You say, oh, Jack was such a brave boy. I'm so proud of him. He told us what Mr. Smith did to him, and we gave him some Skittles. He said red were his favorite. What are your favorite kinds of Skittles? Oh, orange ones? I like yellow. Okay, so if you're brave, like Jack is, you could have Skittles. The kid now knows what it is you're supposed to say. So it's entirely possible that when they interviewed the girl and then they interviewed the boy, they said, now your sister says that what, is on your backside is called a hiney. Is that what you call it? Do you call it a hiney? Okay, let's call it a hiney. You know what I mean? To me, tush is your rear.
Yeah.
What do girls have? Girls don't have birdies. They have what? Oh, they have tushes. And then from then on, it's a tush. And again, it doesn't have to be malicious. But once the story is in place, and, people believe that children, and this happens all the time. Well, why would a child make something up? Well, child can make something up because they were told they could go to Disneyland or they could have Skittles.
I said, look, you get up there and you say that, you're going to go to Disneyland and you're going to see Mickey Mouse. He said, Daddy, I'm sorry, man. He said, I want to go to Disneyland. He said, what kid wouldn't do it, man? He said, I didn't know better. He said, I went up there and I agreed with him. I said everything that he wanted me to see.
So let's jump back now to Dr. Kaufman, the second physician's report, and her physical exam and the findings from that. The physical examination today is inconclusive. There is one area of the hymen that appears to be abnormal on the left lateral side, which appears to be attenuated. The hymen otherwise appears normal. This is not necessarily inconsistent with her history. The child may be relating a history of what is referred to as labial intercourse or rubbing the penis between the labia without necessarily penetration of the hymen. This is perceived by the child as putting it inside. This would not necessarily leave any signs of physical examination on a later date. It should be noted that the majority of children who have been sexually molested will have normal exams, and the absence of specific findings certainly does not rule out a history of sexual molestation. Now, Dr. Kaufman is saying that the findings essentially show no physical signs of sexual abuse. However, this does not mean there hasn't been. And although that obviously can be the case, Professor Laurie Shanks says with the level of abuse that is being claimed, she finds it difficult to imagine that you wouldn't see some extensive injuries on these small children. The second person they used, the lady said that children essentially can perceive penetration differently, and even just rubbing, a penis onto one of their private areas, they can perceive as penetration. Is that true?
Sure, that's true, because a 3-year-old child has no idea what penetration even means. But if a 3-year-old child is anally raped by an adult male, there will be damage. Anal intercourse in a child of 3, there would definitely be physical evidence.
Yeah, and no physical evidence was found in any exams that were done, apparently.
No, and believe me, even if it wasn't done right away, having anal intercourse, if you're 3 years old, there would be bruising, there would be bleeding, there would be scar tissue. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah,
but I've done cases, trust me, we would know about it.
So I just want to go back while we're on Dr. Kaufman's interview with Becky, because she also implicates another member of her family in the sexual abuse, being her uncle, Dwight's brother, Dwayne.
Yeah.
So whatever happened, did he ever get looked at, spoken to?
No, he done an affidavit for me saying he never got questioned, never got talked to, and he was living in home in Louisiana, raising all his, I think he got like 7 kids. He's got a Brady bunch. And so, no, he done an affidavit. I said, Dwayne, you realize your name's in here? He's like, what? I said, so I showed him the paperwork. He's like, what the hell? I said, yeah. She said, you did too. And he's like, he turned around, he said, brother, I'll do a statement, him and his wife. At the time, Monique, and that's why it says 7 black men, Chico, Dwayne, Angela, and Monique, and me. That's 21 people.
So far, Becky has named several people as assaulting her. Obviously, her mother and father, and this gentleman referred to by the children as N-word Roy. Then there's Dwight's brother, Dwayne, as well as apparently a number of other potential suspects. However, for some reason, the police purely focus just on Dwight, his wife, and this man named Roy. So let's look at Roy Francis Jr. and how he comes into this entire picture. So when the children, the boys that is, first make these supposed allegations in the office of the counsellor at ages 3 and 5, They really only talk about their dad being this supposed aggressor. He was the one abusing them and their other siblings, as well as apparently, in their words, raping their mother. Here's an excerpt from the counselor's notes. While Chris and Shane were living with their natural family, they had much exposure to sexual activity. They witnessed their mother and father engaging in sexual intercourse. From what the boys say, it sounds like their father raped their mother in front of them. They witnessed much family violence between their parents. The boys also saw their father molest Becky and molest Jacob. The boys themselves were molested as their father engaged in anal intercourse with them, as well as oral sex. What I found incredible as well is one of the children apparently claims to tell them that they witnessed their mother being raped by their father. How would a child...
Right. And then it was clear over and over. And what does that even mean to a child? The whole thing is horrible.
The counselling continues. In the first few sessions, again, the boys seemed to say that Mum was really the main victim of the aggression in the home. In fact, there's no talk really of anyone else being involved at all, until such time as the children are then taken to the police station. And all of a sudden, Roy's name is brought into the discussion. And Mum is also now a perpetrator. And by the time the children are brought back to the counsellor's office, the boys have now added their mother and other people into these allegations. Now, when Angela, Dwight's former wife, is initially arrested on these charges by police, she states in the police notes that she is innocent and never harmed her children. She tells police times were tough as she was the only one working, so she had to give her children to other family members to look after. She was asked, according to the paperwork, who N-word Roy might be. And she says, Roy Francis.
The only thing I can figure on that is that later on, when they're trying to dig, they're trying to get up something to say, hey, we need to put this case together. We need to do something that we can clasp on. Now, that's all that I can imagine, because Roy to come into the picture, Roy Sr. didn't come into the picture until after the kids were born, and Angela worked at a time saver. Every now and then I used to go pick her up from work, or, we wasn't really together, but I was praying we would, but we didn't. I met the old guy, and he's right there. He would always be right there drinking beer, drinking them, like the old black people do. And he's sitting there drinking and stuff like that. I got to meet him and things, but, the kids were already, it was either with my people or they was up in Opelousas, or they nowhere there wasn't in that area.
In the original arrest notes that I'm reading here, it says when they arrested Angela, they ask her who this N-word Roy might be, and she says, that'll be Roy Francis Jr. And then apparently they ask you the same question. You also say you just say Royal Francis. You don't say Jr. You just say that'll be Royal Francis.
He said Angela said it was Roy Francis Jr.
Hold on, let me check the notes before I get things all confused. The real Bergeron. No, you're right. She just says Royal Francis. She doesn't say the junior part.
Right, because we never heard of no Roy Francis Jr.
Right, that's interesting.
We didn't know until, 20-something years later that the junior was his son.
Now, this is something I totally missed and didn't pick up on. It's a very small detail, but rather significant, that neither Dwight nor Angela mention a Roy Francis Jr. They simply refer to Roy Francis, a man that Dwight says the pair did know just from the fact he was a regular at the place where Angela worked. So the question becomes, how do the police go from that to all of a sudden it's Roy Francis Jr. that's been also involved in the sexual assault of these children? Because police would go on to say that Becky picks out Roy Francis Jr. from a lineup as a man who sexually assaulted her. Why was Roy Francis Jr. ever put into a police lineup? However, she wasn't the only one to connect Roy Francis Jr. to this case. One of Dwight's neighbors also allegedly picks him out of a lineup as a man she says she had seen at Dwight's home.
I then moved out the house where we were living together with the kids, and I'm leaving a trailer on the Bayou side. Landlord said, you can't have no kids here because of the insurance or the Bayou backyard. I said, don't worry, I ain't got no kids. She's going to her mama's. I'm living in this trailer by myself. The woman next door, when the detective Joe McGidry came to her, she says she identified that black dude as coming in and out of my residence. And she says And she heard the kids screaming all hours of the night, and they were there. And she seen all these people coming in and out of the residence, and she heard the kids screaming all hours of the night. She didn't testify, but she testified in the grand jury. I've seen the grand jury subpoena list. And that was the same report that was done by the woman Detective Joe McGidry. 30 years go by, I get a DA file, and I'm like, wait a minute. I tell my lawyers, I said, if I would have known about her at trial, my lawyer would have looked in the records off the DA, wouldn't have hid stuff from the lawyer. I would have proved to you that woman lied to the grand jury. I said, because my kids, I could prove my daughter was already in school, in elementary, in Opelousas. At the time, she said them kids were living there. I said, my landlord lived right across the street, and he would tell you there's no kids living in that trailer. The woman across the street also done a statement. She says, no, Dwight didn't have no kids in that trailer. She said because the landlord told him because of the insurance with the Bayou in the yard, you can't have no kids there. And this dude here that she also identified in the photo lineup, the guy in California, she also said she seen him there. And she heard the kids screaming and hollering all night. Well, wait a minute. The kids I can prove to you, if I'd have known about that, were not living there. They were in Opelousas. And my kids, at that time, when that report was done, our boys were already in Marksville living with the Bayous. So I'm like, why would she say that?
Yet again, what you may describe as another key witness in this case who was used in the grand jury to indict Dwight and Angela on this case, but was never used in the actual trial because, well, her story fell apart. Because Roy Francis Jr., who was arrested as part of this case, supplied the police and the prosecution with a boatload of evidence to prove that he was not even in the state when these allegations took place. And in fact, Dwight says he'd left the state 2 years before Becky was even born.
When Becky identified photo number 2, Roy Francis Jr., they issued a warrant for his arrest, and they were talking about when they went pick him up in that paperwork, how they picked him up and how he was having a hearing on October the 11th or October the 15th during that time. And that's where the paperwork stops. And in that investigation, we found where everything on that guy, except for the toilet paper he used, they got everything on that guy, showing that he was not a resident of Louisiana, that he was a resident and was living and supporting his family and had an everyday job in Santa Clara, California.
So the whole point of this part really is to look at the fact that the police's entire case, because there is no physical findings, is the word of children. Now, if those children have sat and said that this man, Roy, was also sexually abusing them and going to extensive detail as to the fact that he was sexually abusing them, Becky supposedly picking him out of a lineup, and then this man proves that he wasn't even in the state when all of this was supposed to have happened, then surely the police have to say, well, hold on a second, if this young child is wrong about this gentleman sexually abusing her, and she's giving us essentially the same details about her mother and her father and actually many other people, then maybe we need to look at this more closely. Just sounded like a poor child that was utterly confused by what she was supposed to be saying.
Right. There was a total of, I think, 22 or 23 adult individuals that supposedly raped and molested these kids.
You have 1 minute remaining.
And that's all we got time for. But coming up, we head to trial, and the children are prepared by their counsellor, Leslie Reach Parker.
A week before the trial, in that same counselor, she put it in black and white. She says, Becky is crying. Question Becky, why are you crying? And she replies, I'm scared. I ain't gonna know the answer to the big questions. I ain't gonna know the words for the bad stuff.
The lady who was first made aware of this apparent abuse, a woman who in fact was the first to make an official report to authorities, but a woman who would not only not be brought to testify at trial, but Dwight's defense didn't even know existed.
That didn't come out till like a dozen years after I was convicted. We didn't know this. And
Young Becky takes to the stand, and it's just all too much for Dwight.
I said, don't put her back up there. She'll be too enough.
Next time on 1 Minute Remaining. 1 Minute Remaining is a Mashed Pumpkin production, created, hosted, and produced by Jack Lawrence. With thanks to special guest producer, Alyssa Cook. Audio and sound design by Jack Lawrence and Dom Evans of Earsay.